Em,
and Lex.
two imperfect six-figure business coaches, co-founders, and friends who decided to combine our superpowers to bring to market something we wish we had when we entered the world of coaching.
A real, non-BS, intimate, and fun community built with integrity, intention, and a few glasses of wine.
In this podcast, we get real.
Real about life,
Business,
relationships,
and what it really takes to find your version of success in the world of coaching. Are you ready, Lex?
I'm set, Em.
Let's coach.
Hey, Lex.
Hello, Emily, Merrell.
Last time I talked to you on the podcast, you were a coughing wreck.
Oh, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that that still might happen. The hacking of the lung is still with me.
Isn't it funny? It's like the summer colds always have, like the pre-summer cold, I feel like is in full bloom right now. And you were in Palm Springs. Do you feel like being in like the dry climate helped at all?
No, not at all. It was 105 degrees, and my joke was, I don't know what's hotter, my head or pavement. I was super, super sick, and it's like, hey, cold, stop being so obsessed with me. You can go away now. Good news about this cold, though, is that somehow miraculously, and knock on wood, my husband and daughter have not gotten it. Do you believe on knock on wood? Completely.
I do. Oh, and I'm very superstitious. Like whenever I lived in New York City, when I lived in New York City, and I'd see a ladder, like I would cross the street to avoid going underneath a ladder.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm superstitious too. I always do the knock on wood.
When I flew, I used to have more of a fear of flying. And luckily that fear has dissipated, and I'm very much like accepting of whatever happens on a plane is going to happen on the plane type of thing. But I used to have this fear that I was responsible for keeping the plane afloat, which is very narcissistic in a way, but I'd have to like stay up staring out of my window to like keep the plane afloat.
Oh my gosh, there's so many potentially deep conversations that you just brought up. But the one that I wanted to just highlight was, I've never thought of superstition as a form of narcissism.
I know.
But it kind of can be.
Or like egotistical, kind of like
you're just kind of is, if you really think about it. Like in some cases it's not relevant, but if you go, I hate when my husband goes like, I've never been in a insert type of accident.
Oh yeah. You're like, I'm never driving with you again.
I'm like, maybe there's not ego in there, but what's a good example? I feel like there's truth to that. Like, why does you and your thought process impact
the whole world
on that plane?
I'll give an example. So I watched a movie on the plane. I watched 80 for Brady. Have you heard of that one? It's about this group of four 80-year-old women who are obsessed with Tom Brady. And like, it's adorable. It's Jane Fonda, it's Lily Tomlin, like it's the Grace and Frankie reunited, but with some other characters. And the very first time like they won the Super Bowl, they like one woman was reading a magazine, one person was changing a light, one person was eating chips. So every single Super Bowl they'll like start the game doing the same exact thing, because they're like, they won the Super Bowl when we did this the last 3 times, or the first time, then the second time, then the third time. So they really feel like it is their act of like doing that ritual.
Okay, that's a good example. What's funny about sports? So when you talk about sports, I played sports. I played basketball. And in basketball, you do a lot of pivots, right? That's one of your defensive moves. Which I'm sure that exists in football too, right? Pivot. It's a movement. And that's so relevant because today, by the way, that was like 5 squirrels, and this is such a quick transition, you guys. But here it is. Today we're talking about to pivot or not pivot. Is pivoting in your coaching practice or business smart, or is it an excuse?
Oh, dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Can we get sound effects in this podcast? I feel like
Haley, official request. Shout out to
I'm like, well, kicking things off, Lex, I feel like first and foremost, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the Friends episode about pivoting.
Oh God, I don't know it.
What?
Oh
What?
no.
Oh my
no.
God, this is literally going to be our text exchange the rest of today. So you don't remember the scene in Friends where they have the couch and they're bringing the couch up like 5 flights of stairs, and I think Ross keeps yelling, pivot, pivot, pivot.
No, to be honest, I've seen some Friends, but maybe that's my next show I need to binge. I'm like super deep in Grey's Anatomy right now. I'm still in that, by the way.
How many years has it been now?
But okay, don't listen if you're watching Grey's Anatomy, because I'm about to say a spoiler alert, but Derek Shepherd just died last night, and it took like 3 episodes, and I was bawling my eyes out, like uncontrollably. CJ and Ashton didn't know, was just like, what in the actual world? I'm like, which I knew it was going to happen. Anyways, I haven't seen Friends, but maybe I need to binge it. I totally hijacked that. So
I feel like it's like an antidote to Grey's Anatomy. And I remember hearing about that episode. I stopped watching ages ago with Grey's, but like I probably would be in a depression for about a year from just that one episode. Like One Tree Hill, thinking back about One Tree Hill still like wrecks me from all the people that died needlessly. Like, can you imagine going to high school or working at a hospital where you have so many ridiculous, tragic, surprising deaths?
Poor Meredith Grey. But anyways,
pivoting. So back to anyways. Okay, well, never mind. Ignore everything I said about Friends. It was just the image of pivoting, where it can be sometimes uncomfortable. It can sometimes be it can be a team effort, and sometimes no one knows what the F you're doing.
Yes. And actually, I think the word pivot became trendy. I'm going to use the word trending largely in the pandemic. And actually, that's super, super relevant to our industry, because when we were all forced into this virtual world, a lot of people ran to the coaching industry. And something that Emily and I have seen is people pivoting strategically, and people using the word pivot or the concept of pivot to act as an excuse or cover something else that's going on inside.
Yeah. And I want to say, in a business context, according to my Google search of the word pivot, it is completely changing the way in which one does something. So Lex, I love that let's start off with like the positive pivot. The pandemic pivoting was a very popular
pandemic pivoting.
I know, we're going to talk about
PPP loan.
Exactly.
Is now, okay.
Yeah, that's what that stands for. But I think the pandemic, you're right, was such a great way where people who pivoted and did it well prospered. I'm going to just stick with the P. And those that didn't and waited the 2 weeks that they thought this was going to end, really were scrambling to figure out how to accommodate their clients. So I'll say with 6 Degrees, I gave myself a pity party for 45 minutes, and then it was like
pity party.
Yeah, see, I'm crushing this today. And then I was able to put my people positively, I'll stop, on screen. I was able to go to Zoom and like cultivate community from this virtual space. So that's an example of pivoting to save my business, and pivoting to also like fill a void that was in the marketplace, which was community and connection. What you were referencing was a lot of people did also pivot to starting a coaching business. Maybe they like left their already existing business and decided making jewelry didn't make sense anymore. I want to coach people on how to start jewelry businesses. I don't want to be the physical laborer who is making jewelry. So we saw like pivots of industry where they took the knowledge in which they've learned from one business, and then they were able to apply it to another. But what you're referencing also is the negative side of pivoting, where people will try things for a minute and then feel it's uncomfortable and then decide to try something else.
Yep, exactly. So one of the big mistakes that Emily and I have seen, both individually and collectively, is people using a pivot as an opportunity to get re-excited about something because they don't want to face the reality that they haven't given something enough time. if you, for example, it's a very specific example. Let's say you launch as a business coach and you put your dream offering out into the market and you work your little booty off in promoting it, let's say even for 2 months, and just crickets. We see a lot of people start to panic and go to the default that this isn't working. And there can be some parts of that end up making that valid, but other people say, okay, I guess I need to pivot. Now, all of a sudden that business coach who was offering this one-on-one program decides to become a systems coach and is offering, a community. And then they try that for 2 weeks, not 2 weeks, 2 months, it's not working. So, okay, in order to get excited again, I'm going to pivot. Now I'm going to be a technical coach and offer blah, blah, blah. And this cycle continues where they're reinventing their business because it is fun and it can be exciting to reinvent. And the harder part is buckling down and marketing and selling this new offer.
And we also want to acknowledge that we've had people in 6 degrees, people in Ready, Set, Coach who have pivoted pretty quickly within joining our program. We've had people go from dating coach to life coach, or what was it called? Oh my gosh, I forgot what the word was. Some sort of coach to like a communications coach. We've seen it happen. And a lot of times the thing that changes is the title and not the teachings. And so that is I've changed my title like a bajillion times, and I've evolved my title, and I like to look at it more as an evolution than a pivot, but it's not changing the teachings. It's like honing in or deepening one of the teachings. So yeah, Lex, I think what you're saying too about the person who is like pray and spraying pretty much, and they're putting something out there and they're hoping that this resonates, but then when it doesn't resonate, they're like, whoa, this will resonate. So can you tell me what you think? What if what they're doing is uncomfortable to them and there's something else that they want to pivot to that they're a lot more equipped to tackle and feeling more confident in tackling? Do you think they should pivot, or should they stay with the thing that's uncomfy?
I think it's really, really important to dissect and deeply look at the why. If they, first and foremost, what is their why for coaching? What is their why for life? What is their why for business? So if we have that clearly identified, then we can start to answer these specific questions. But if you're coming up with an initial niche and offering that you originally think is in alignment with your why, but it is uncomfy because it's something new, does that necessarily mean it's wrong? Would it be wiser to default back to something that feels safer? That's where I think that's a discussion comes into play. And we see coaches on both sides of the coin. I can see them using it as an excuse because it is uncomfy and it's so much easier to go back to my comfort zone. And then we've seen scenarios where, no, genuinely that first pivot into something new was the wrong pivot and they shouldn't have pivoted away to begin with.
Lex, how can people find out how to work with us?
Super simple. Go to readysetcoachprogram.com, link in show notes.
So in the pivot, I think that there is an element of like, you don't want to be so uncomfortable in what you're selling that it doesn't feel aligned with you. And a lot of people do try to put like a square peg in a round hole type of situation. They're like, oh, I've seen other people do it. I want to do it. I can do it. But then what happens as they put it out there is an energetics about this. There's an energetics about selling. There's an energetics about showing up. There's an energetics about like delivering yourself as a coach and holding space for a person. And for whatever reason, we've all seen it before. We've all seen someone who's launched and you're like, the messaging makes sense to me, but like, I'm not interested. It just doesn't give me that FOMO or that feeling of like, I want to be a part of it. And then we have seen those pivots before where all of a sudden something tweaks, or like the way that they're talking to the person tweaks, or the way that they're clearer on who the person they're serving is, and you're like, oh my God, I get it. It snaps into place. So I think for pivoting, and something that we should talk about a little bit deeper, Lex, is like using pivot to iterate, or like allowing yourself to iterate, but also allow yourself to give yourself time on something.
Time is key. So what would be a helpful first question if you are someone who's sitting in a junction in your life where the current offering, the current way you're putting yourself out into the world, the current coaching structure that you have hasn't quite financially resonated yet? What's a question you can ask yourself to better understand if maybe it's time strategically to pivot, or if you're using that word or that concept to mask something else going on?
Yeah. And I think, you're so right with the resistance too. Like, I think there's a lot of masking that happens, where before people have to then do the direct outreach, or before people have to do an Instagram live, or whatever the like uncomfortable thing is, they'll just be like, well, the offer is not working, so I'm going to just do the same thing all over again and try a whole different offer. So another question to ask yourself is, are you excited? Like, what is exciting you about your offer? And if you were a consumer, what would excite you about going through and experiencing this offer?
Well, I think that first part of that first question is where we should start. Do you want to do this? Do you want to deliver this? Does this excite you? When you think about delivering this service to a client, are you lit up, or are you kind of dreading it? Right? That's one question to look at, right?
But I also want to add to this, from people, from us who have delivered things before, there is an aspect of dread in actually selling your program. And I'll say that in, like, once you sell it, even to one person, then you're like, oh my God, I actually have to follow through with this. And so that feeling of dread can sometimes be mixed with like the feeling of delivering. And so just be mindful that sometimes if you do sell it, or you have success or whatnot, you then have to show up.
Well, okay, so let's pick at that for a second. Are you dreading selling it, or are you dreading the delivery of it? Now, if you identify you're dreading selling, I mean, honestly, are you ever going to not? Let's be honest with
ourselves. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. In part two, if it is on the delivery side, is it because you are having imposter syndrome? You're not quite sure if it's going to work, or do you really just not want to do this thing? Right? So like, if you decide that the market needs a business offering talking about systems, and you're like, okay, like, objectively, that's smart. I know people need it. Whether or not I like selling is irrelevant, because I probably hate selling no matter what. But when I think about the delivery, man, I just don't like tech. Like, is that where you can do it, but like, I don't want to. If that's where you're sitting, then you have a clear misalignment, right?
Totally. You're like, I'm a creative this whole time. I want to be selling art classes and getting in touch with their creative side. Yeah, that's a really good call out, Lex. And really digging deep of being like, do you feel like you have to, because you've followed, I think there's a lot of haves in our lives. Let's just say that, like, oh, I'm married, I have to stay married even though I'm miserable, or I have to be a stay-at-home mom because that was the commitment I made at the beginning of having kids, but I really don't want to be anymore. So it's like there's a lot of haves and shoulds in life that are gonna jump up at you and jump out at you. And so how can you do a little soul searching and just make sure that it's not a have, it's like a want.
Yeah. And I think the kind of core of what we're talking about here is you have to have a really clear and honest understanding of who you are and your why. And if that feels unattainable to achieve within just yourself, then can you enlist someone like a coach or a friend who can be that mirror to really sit down with you and figure out that answer? Emily recently had a coaching session with another client of ours where she was able to act as a mirror for this wonderful human and help this wonderful human realize that at the end of the day, she wasn't aligned with what she was offering the world. And when there truly isn't an alignment, that's when, yeah, okay, maybe we consider a pivot.
And I think that's really cool when you see someone who's like dragging their feet at building their website, or dragging their feet at making that launch, or showing up in a full way, and then they get that alignment. There's that moment where everything awakens in them and things are built tomorrow. And you're like, oh my gosh, look, that messaging resonates. Your ideal client stands out, like everything falls into place. But it does take time, and it takes to pivot. I think it can also take that permission slip from an outside person, where they feel like they're so far down a particular lane that, well, aren't I a failure if I am pivoting? So I think looking at pivoting, so if you are in the market to pivot, think about yourself. Is this giving up on something, or is this like reevaluating something? And I'm going to use an example of tech companies, and Lexie probably have more examples in your back pocket, but Slack, when it was created, was not created to be Slack. It was not created to be a consumer product. It was created for an internal product of, like, my understanding, it was for for playing video games, and for gamers to connect with one another in a bigger way. And then what ended up being the outcome of Slack was, we're on Slack, we use it to communicate as a team. Probably millions of teams use it as a communication tool, but their initial design of Slack was not what we know to be Slack today. Same thing with Instagram. Like, things can have iterations and evolve. So allow yourself that permission, but also be cognizant of, to Lexie's point, prevention of actually doing the damn thing.
Yeah, it's a super fine line, and it really does require a high level self-awareness. So something you can do when we talk about some reflection questions for homework today is if you can't do this, you yourself and you, that's totally fine. Enlist a coach, enlist a friend, enlist someone you trust. First, look at your patterns, your past patterns. I see a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of creatives chasing what I call shiny object syndrome. I totally get caught up in this, by the way, sometimes. I have literally built probably 25 different websites for 25 different business ideas. It is really exciting for a short amount of time. When you get a new idea, you can get lit up. Now, sometimes that can grow legs and become a true business. Other times you have to sit back and realize, is this a theme? Is this part of my personality? Have I really reinvented and repivoted like 3 or 4 times now? If that's the case, then we might be going towards the to not pivot side, because we're using the pivot as a mask to allow us to show up and get uncomfy and do the real work.
Totally. And in something a little bit more playful, Lex, I'm curious, if you were told you can't do the PR bar, or you can't do Ready, Set, Coach anymore, and you had to pivot and do a new business, what would your business be?
I just go all in on Ready, Set, Coach.
No, I said not Ready, Set, Coach either. You couldn't do Ready, Set, Coach, and you couldn't do the PR bar.
Well, one day I want to open a winery with puppy dog rescues too. So.
Okay. And at the winery, I want to have a bead store where we can make jewelry, and we can sit and drink wine and make jewelry collectively.
Okay, so you now know Emily and I's life version 2.3.0. But yeah, so to kind of recap today, guys, this was really a conversation. This wasn't us giving you direct steps to understand if your pivot is strategic or an excuse, but we wanted to just get these thoughts percolating in your mind. So your homework is to do a bit of self-reflection. If you're currently in a season of pivot, or next time you are, first question, reconnect with your why. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? 2, do you see any patterns? And this can also show up in other things other than work. Are you a hobby switcher? my husband is, for example. He's very dedicated to work. He's only worked with one company, but he's a hobby switcher. So he'll get really amped up about a hobby for like 3 months, and then he'll switch hobbies. And he wants to invest in that hobby, but I know he has a pattern of changing hobbies. So I'm like, you're going to invest in this hobby right before you change your hobby.
What's his hobby now?
Work right now is we're just in a season of, well, he just took over. He's like a double down work hobbyist right now. So part 1, remember your why. Part 2, do a little bit of self-awareness and loving call out. Do you see any patterns? And then part 3, Emily, I think you're great to speak to this. What are some body indications that we are feeling aligned or misaligned?
Yeah. And if you feel the resistance, usually it manifests in your heart or in your belly or in your shoulders. Like if you feel resistance to doing something versus excitement to doing something, but not in the way that Lexie's husband does for a temporary period of time, where you feel like I can commit to this and I know I'm going to commit to this. Maybe that is also enlisting the coach or the friend or the partner and saying like, hey, if I try to deviate from this path, like remind me to stay on the path and to give it at least X number of time. Because as we know, y'all, Rome wasn't built in a day. There's no such thing as overnight success. And there's a lot of evolution that happens within one business.
Mike, here's my mic. I'm dropping it.
You're dropping it. Well, Lex, now you got me reflecting. I'm like, am I a hobby switcher? Yeah.
No, I'm not. By the way, just do all the disclaimers. If you identify as someone who is the constant pivoter or the constant hobbyist, I am married to one legally, two legally. I'm married to Emily legally with the business and my husband legally with the marital contract. So clearly I like you people. I'm just
Lex, what's my hobby? What's my hobby of choice? You have to say it.
Now you're in a deep reading phase.
Yes. And what's the other one?
Well, you like friendship bracelets.
Well, yeah, that was
Are you not getting that?
No,
core power yoga. Take a
there
shot.
There we go.
Okay.
But I want to go back to rock climbing. So,
rock climbing. So, okay, guys, that's the thoughts we have for you today.
We'll see
you
you
on Instagram if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time
on the Ready Set Coach podcast.
If you're enjoying the Ready Set Coach podcast, please leave a review wherever you are listening. For more information about Ready Set Coach, visit readysetcoachprogram.com.